Man, listen, I gotta talk about something that kind of flipped my head around, because it's not every day you hear a guy like Steven Spielberg. Yeah, the Spielberg. Open up about something that isn't Hollywood fame or some behind-the-scenes magic with cameras. No, this dude sat there and started talking about Islam. And not in that surface level, oh, it's interesting kind of way. He talked about it with this genuine admiration, like he'd spent time actually observing people, trying to understand the discipline behind it. And it wasn't some PR line or some actor-style spiritual phase. It was raw, real, honest. He said what hit him first was the structure. The way Islam takes your day, your chaotic, messy, unpredictable day, and anchors it, like you could be spiraling. You could be in the middle of the loudest world possible, and then boom, it's prayer time. Everything stops. The noise, the stress, the ego, the outside world, and suddenly you're standing still, aligning your whole body towards something bigger. He said that fascinated him way more than any ritual he'd ever seen, because it wasn't performance, it wasn't ceremony, it was lifestyle. It was discipline, built into the bones of daily life. And he said something like, imagine if people had that kind of intentional break built into their lives. 5 moments every single day where they step out of the madness and just breathe in purpose. And I'm sitting there thinking, actually, that's kind of wild, because most people don't even take 5 minutes for themselves, let alone 5 structured pauses that connect them to something meaningful. We're scrolling, we're reacting, we're overloaded with notifications, and meanwhile there are people who pause the entire rhythm of their day just to straighten their mind. And Spielberg, man, he respected that. He talked about how in Hollywood everything is about speed. Deadlines, pressure, rushing, constantly running toward the next big thing. But when he watched Muslims around him pause for prayer, even during shoots, even during exhausting schedules, it wasn't an interruption. It was grounding. It was like watching someone plug back into a source of power he didn't fully understand but admired from a distance. He said it was one of the few moments he'd seen where a human being truly steps outside of the world's chaos without using escapism. No substances, no distractions, just intention, and he kept going deeper. He said the discipline of Islam isn't just in prayer, it's in the way Muslims organize their lives around values, purpose, accountability. Like every action has a weight to it, every choice has meaning. He said Islam doesn't give you loose guidelines, it gives you a structure that shapes your character. And he found that beautiful because he always believed discipline was one of the purest forms of art. The ability to stick to something every single day, even when no one's watching, even when it's hard, even when your mind's scattered. And in Islam, he saw that commitment everywhere. He said it's not just religion for them, it's architecture for the soul. And man, that line stuck with me. Because if you think about it, architecture has rules. You can't build anything balanced without a foundation, and Islam gives you that foundation, how you speak, how you eat, how you treat others, how you carry yourself, how you control your impulses, how you regulate your ego. And Spielberg admired that more than anything. He admired the idea that a faith could shape not just belief, but behavior. That it could give people a blueprint for living with discipline instead of drifting through life. He said he noticed how Muslims don't separate their spiritual life from their personal life. There's no religion on Friday, regular life on Saturday. It's integrated. Everything flows into everything. And he loved that contrast with the way people in modern culture compartmentalize everything. Work here, family there, spirituality somewhere in a locked box they open twice a year. But Muslims, they live it all at once. Their values sit in their walk, their speech, their choices. And Spielberg said that consistency humbled him. He talked about Ramadan too. He said the discipline of fasting blew his mind. Not just the not eating part. Anyone can not eat for a few hours, but the self-restraint, the patience, the intentional control over desires, the ability to say no to yourself for 30 straight days, and not out of punishment but out of devotion, out of spiritual training. He said it made him rethink what real strength looks like. 'Cause in Hollywood, strength is loud, visible, flashy. But the strength he saw in Muslims during Ramadan, that was silence, that was internal, that was self-mastery. And he admired that deeply. He said something like, "There's a discipline here that the world doesn't understand because it never bothers to look." That one stuck with me, because he wasn't wrong, People judge from distance, from headlines, from stories written by people who never stepped foot inside the experience. But Spielberg actually watched people. He paid attention. And what he saw wasn't extremism, wasn't chaos, wasn't harshness. He saw structure, calmness, control, and then he talked about something that hit him even harder, the simplicity of Islamic discipline. He said most spiritual systems he'd explored had complexity layered on complexity, riddles, symbols, mystical puzzles. But Islam? Islam was clear, straightforward, direct. 5 prayers, 1 God, clear values, clear ethics, clear do's and don'ts. It wasn't confusing, it wasn't cryptic, it was practical, and he respected the hell out of that. Because he said the modern world is drowning in complication and starving for clarity. He mentioned the way Muslims purify before prayer, wudu, and he said that act alone touched him in a strange way. The idea of washing your hands, face, arms, feet before you stand in front of God, not because God needs you to be clean, but because you need to enter that moment with intention, that discipline of preparing your mind by preparing your body. He found it poetic, symbolic, almost cinematic in its meaning. He said it felt like the perfect transition from the world to the divine, and then he joked, well, half-joked, that if people applied even 10% of Islamic discipline to their lives, half the world's problems would evaporate. Because discipline makes you honest. Discipline makes you responsible. Discipline makes you aware of your actions. He saw that in Muslims and he admired it openly, even boldly. And he didn't care who disagreed. He said he'd met Muslims who wake up at dawn every single day, no matter how tired, no matter how busy, because the discipline of prayer wasn't optional to them. It was like breathing, like drinking water. And he said that level of discipline builds a person from the inside out. Creates mental strength you can't teach in any acting school or corporate workshop. It comes from surrendering your ego to a higher purpose. And he loved that. He said something that actually gave me chills. In Islam, discipline isn't forced, it's embraced. And that was powerful to me, because he understood something most people never bother to see, that Muslims don't pray because someone's watching. They don't fast because someone's measuring. They do it because their faith builds an internal reason, an internal anchor. You don't need a crowd. You don't need applause. You don't need validation. You do it because it's part of who you are. Spielberg respected that with his whole heart. All right, so here's where it gets even heavier, because Spielberg didn't stop at just admiring the daily discipline or the spiritual structure. He said something that honestly made me sit back and rethink the way people look at strength. He said Islam has this internal engineering, like this built-in system that teaches you how to handle your impulses, your desires, your anger, your fears, everything that makes you human, but also everything that can mess you up if you don't control it. He said he'd never seen a faith that trains the human being from the inside the way Islam does. And when he said that, he wasn't talking about theory, he wasn't quoting scholars, he was talking about what he'd seen with his own eyes. He talked about working with Muslim actors, Muslim producers, Muslim crew members on set, and he said their level of calmness under stress felt unreal sometimes, like everyone else would be losing their minds, shouting, running around, panicking when something went wrong on set. But the Muslims? They'd handle it with this bizarre patience, like they'd just breathe and stay centered. And when he asked one of them how they do it, the guy said something simple like, if you train your heart 5 times a day, nothing outside can shake it. And Spielberg said that line stuck with him for years. And he went deeper, man. He talked about the way Islam teaches people to regulate their reactions. Like the Prophet talked about who the strongest person is. Not the one who can defeat someone physically, but the one who controls their anger. Spielberg loved that. He said in a world where everyone is triggered by everything, where people explode at the smallest inconvenience, that kind of emotional training is rare. He said Muslims aren't told to hide their emotions, they're told to master them. And he admired that mastery. Then he touched on something that honestly felt like he was confessing, a truth about modern society. He said the Western world is obsessed with freedom, but half the time it's freedom without discipline, freedom without boundaries. And that's not freedom, that's chaos wearing a costume. But in Islam, discipline creates freedom. It frees you from addiction, from impulses, from reacting without thinking, from living like you're pulled around by your emotions. And he said he envied that balance because so many people in Hollywood, despite all their success, lived completely unstructured lives, and he wasn't insulting anyone, he was being real. He talked about late-night parties, the pressure to perform, the burnout, the cycle of highs and lows, the constant search for meaning in places that never give it. He said Islam provided something Hollywood couldn't replicate: predictability, stability. A rhythm that doesn't break, no matter how chaotic life gets. And he said he respected people who lived with that kind of groundedness. He shared this moment he witnessed during a shoot overseas. They were filming in a Muslim-majority country, and suddenly the call to prayer echoed over the city, the Adhan. And Spielberg said he didn't understand the words, but he felt something in his chest when he heard it. He said it wasn't dramatic, it wasn't emotional, it wasn't cinematic, it was grounding. Like a reminder that there's something bigger going on than whatever humans are stressing about. And then he watched people around him calmly roll up their sleeves, wash up, and stand in prayer. And he said the synchronization of it, the unity, the uniformity, the peace, was unlike anything he'd seen anywhere. And then he said something wild. He said the discipline of prayer felt like a form of meditation that had been perfected centuries before meditation became trendy in the West. He said the posture, the breathing, the stillness, it was like a full-body reset. Except it wasn't self-worship or self-centering, it was self-surrender. And he said that difference was profound, because surrender requires more strength than control. You don't kneel unless you're confident. You don't bow unless your ego is in check. And Spielberg said watching millions of people bow at the exact same time across the world was one of the most humbling things he'd ever thought about. Then he mentioned something that really shows how deeply he'd been paying attention. He talked about Islamic cleanliness, the idea of purification. Not just wudu before prayer, but the whole lifestyle around physical and spiritual cleanliness. The idea that your heart can get dirty with arrogance, with envy, with greed, with resentment, and Islam teaches you how to wash that too, not with water, but with forgiveness, charity, patience, prayer. Spielberg loved that symbolism. He said it was like watching a system designed not just for worship, but for mental health. And honestly, he wasn't wrong. Because if you think about it, the modern world is full of spiritual clutter, emotional clutter, psychological pollution, and here's a religion that literally gives you a cleansing method for the soul. He even pointed out how Muslims choose their words carefully, because the Prophet taught them that every word counts. Every sentence has weight. Your tongue is accountable. And Spielberg said that alone could fix half the drama in society. Imagine people thinking before speaking. Imagine people choosing honesty, choosing kindness, choosing to avoid gossip. He admired how Islam trains the tongue, the mind, the hands, the heart, all through structure and discipline. And then he talked about something way deeper, the discipline of intention. He said one of the most beautiful things he learned from talking to Muslims was that in Islam, your intention matters just as much as your action. You could do something small like giving someone water or picking up trash, and if your intention is sincere, it becomes something spiritual, something rewarded, something meaningful. He said he loved that idea because it flips the modern world upside down. In modern life, everything is judged by results. In Islam, it's judged by intention. And Spielberg said that kind of mindset builds compassionate people, not just successful ones. He said something that stuck with him for decades: in Islam, even sleeping becomes worship if the intention is right. And he laughed, because he said no other belief system he'd encountered made something as simple as rest feel purposeful. But that's the structure he admired. That's the discipline he couldn't stop talking about. Islam didn't divide life into holy and ordinary, it made the ordinary holy, it made the ordinary meaningful. And he said that kind of system is genius. He even talked about how Islam disciplines you not to judge others, how the faith emphasizes humility, the idea that you don't know what's inside someone's heart, you don't know their struggles, you don't know their level with God. And Spielberg said that humility is missing everywhere today. Everyone wants to point fingers, everyone wants to be right, everyone wants moral superiority. But Islam teaches you to worry about your own soul first. Fix yourself before you judge anyone else. And he said that was one of the most mature approaches to spirituality he'd ever seen. He admired the way Muslims remind themselves of death, not in a morbid way, but in a grounding way. The idea that life is temporary, that the ego is temporary, that your power is temporary. And that reminder disciplines you to live responsibly, live kindly, live with awareness. Spielberg said that perspective made Muslims carry themselves differently, like they're not wasting time, not drifting, not living mindlessly. He admired that more than he ever said publicly. So here's where Spielberg's perspective really starts getting intense, because he didn't just admire the discipline itself, he admired what that discipline creates. He said Islam builds a certain kind of human being, and he noticed it over and over again in different countries. different environments, even different generations. He said the consistency of character amazed him. Like he'd meet Muslims who grew up on opposite sides of the world, totally different cultures, totally different lifestyles, but they carried the same principles, the same calmness, the same sense of accountability, the same awareness of how their actions affect other people. And he said that kind of consistency can only come from a system that actually works. He talked about how Islam teaches responsibility in a way that's almost poetic, like the idea that your actions echo. Everything you do is recorded, everything you say has weight, every choice shapes your soul. And Spielberg said he found that concept powerful because in modern society, people act like consequences don't exist. People lie, cheat, betray, destroy relationships, destroy themselves, act like there's nothing holding them accountable. But Islam tells you from day one, everything matters, everything counts. And he respected that deeply. He spoke about how Muslims start learning discipline early. Kids are taught to respect their parents, to speak kindly, to control their anger, to say Bismillah before eating, Alhamdulillah after finishing. And he said that kind of early training creates adults who are grounded, not drifting, adults who don't have to reinvent their morals every 5 years because they never had a foundation. He said he admired how Islam doesn't wait for you to be old enough for structure. No, it gives you structure from the beginning. And not in a strict, oppressive way, but in a way that shapes your identity, your confidence, your sense of purpose. And then he went into something deeper, how Islam connects discipline to spirituality, not punishment. He said in so many other systems, discipline is about fear of breaking rules, fear of consequence, fear of judgment. But in Islam, discipline is an act of love. You pray because you want closeness. You fast because you want purification. You give charity because you want compassion. Spielberg said he was blown away by how positive the discipline was. It wasn't about beating you down, it was about building you up. He said he once asked a Muslim colleague why he prayed even when he was exhausted, stressed, or working long days, and the guy said, "It doesn't drain me, it resets me." Spielberg said that answer hit him so hard that he thought about it for days. Because most people in the world rely on unhealthy resets, drugs, alcohol, distractions, entertainment, anything that shuts the mind off for a little while. But these people, they reset with stillness, with intention, with surrender. And he said that kind of discipline produces a different kind of peace, a different kind of person. He also talked about how Islam disciplines the ego. And he said that struck him because ego is the biggest monster he'd ever seen in Hollywood. It ruins careers, ruins friendships, ruins families. It's like this silent virus that spreads everywhere. But Muslims, they're constantly taught to check their ego, to recognize that everything they have is from God, that humility isn't weakness, it's strength. And Spielberg said that humility creates healthier people, people who don't think the world revolves around them, people who don't crumble when things go wrong, people who don't lose themselves in fame or success because they know both are temporary. He said he saw this humility on set so many times. He talked about one scene where the lighting tech messed up, and instead of freaking out or yelling, the Muslim crew member calmly stepped aside, whispered something under his breath, some dua or dhikr, and came back with full focus. Spielberg said he asked him later, "What were you saying?" And the guy just smiled and said, "I was reminding myself to stay grateful." And Spielberg said that absolutely floored him. Because imagine living with that mentality every day. Imagine your default reaction to stress being gratitude instead of anger. That's the discipline Islam teaches. He said he also admired the way Muslims stay connected to family. In the West, he said independence is pushed so hard that people become islands. Parents age alone, children grow up without structure, families drift apart. But in Islam, discipline includes loyalty, responsibility to your parents, respect for your elders, care for your children. He said that kind of family discipline creates stronger communities, stronger mental health, and stronger emotional stability. And he said he'd seen generations of Muslim families who grew up with this unity that felt almost sacred. And then he talked about something he found incredibly rare in the modern world, the way Muslims give, the discipline of charity, the idea that giving isn't optional, it's obligatory. That if you've been blessed with wealth, part of that wealth isn't even yours. It belongs to the poor. Spielberg said that blew his mind because it flips greed on its head. Instead of hoarding, Islam trains you to share. Instead of obsessing over what you earn, you think about who you can help. He said that kind of discipline, if practiced globally, would transform society. Poverty wouldn't disappear, but compassion would multiply. And he respected that on a level he couldn't even fully express. He also loved the concept of self-restraint in Islam, not just with food or desire, but with behavior. like the idea that you don't look at things that harm your heart, you don't listen to things that corrupt your mind, you don't engage in things that drag you down spiritually. He said that takes insane discipline, because the modern world is built on temptation, built on distraction, built on dopamine overload, and yet Islam gives people the tools to filter their environments, filter their habits, filter their influences. Spielberg said that kind of conscious living is rare, and he admired it more the older he got. He talked about how Muslims always begin tasks with the name of God, Bismillah, and he said that blew him away philosophically. Because imagine starting everything with awareness. Eating, traveling, working, speaking, everything. That's not just discipline, that's mindfulness. That's bringing spirituality into the smallest moments of life. Spielberg said he loved that because modern spirituality is always about big experiences. Mountains, retreats, meditation trips. But Islam finds spirituality in drinking water with gratitude, in waking up, in breathing. And he said that changed the way he looked at faith entirely. He admired the way Muslims accept hardships with patience. He said that discipline of patience was one of the hardest things to understand. When life hit them, they didn't collapse. They didn't blame God. They didn't drown in self-pity. They said sabr, patience. They said qadr, destiny. Spielberg said that level of acceptance was extraordinary. Not passive acceptance, but powerful acceptance. The kind that gives you mental stability instead of panic. And he said the world could learn a lot from that. And then he said the thing that honestly gave me chills. He said he believed Islamic discipline creates a clarity that people in the modern world are desperate for, but don't know how to find. He said he met Muslims who had this quiet certainty in their lives, this inner compass, this internal direction, and he envied that, because so many people he knew, even the successful ones, lived like they were lost. But these Muslims, they knew who they were, they knew where they were going, they knew what mattered. And Spielberg said that came from discipline, not luck. So here's where Spielberg, whole perspective reached this almost spiritual clarity, because he wasn't just talking about discipline as some nice character trait, he was talking about how it shapes an entire worldview. He said Islam doesn't just teach you how to behave, it teaches you why you exist. And that kind of direction, that kind of clarity, is something he said he'd been searching for his entire life without even realizing it. He talked about watching Muslims live with this awareness that every moment has purpose. Not because someone is policing them, but because they genuinely believe that life is a trust, a test, a temporary journey. He said he envied that awareness because the modern world is obsessed with distractions, entertainment, consumption, noise, anything that keeps you from thinking about the deeper stuff. But Islam pushes you toward the deeper stuff every single day. Spielberg said that was the thing most people don't understand. Islam doesn't let you forget who you are or why you're here. He mentioned the way Muslims always say Insha'Allah about the future, and he loved that more than he expected. He said it wasn't fatalism, it was humility. It was discipline against arrogance. It was a reminder that no matter how powerful you think you are, you're not in control of everything. And he said that attitude creates emotionally healthier people because they don't break when things don't go their way. They don't collapse under pressure. They accept, they adjust, they keep moving. He said that level of mental resilience is rare. But then he talked about funerals, and this part really hit him. He said Islamic funerals are simple, no show, no extravagance, no gold caskets, no display, just a body, a prayer, and a reminder that you came from the earth and you return to it. He said that simplicity carried a profound lesson, discipline even in death. No ego, no sense of status, no illusion of permanence. He said he found that powerful because he'd been to Hollywood funerals where everything was about legacy and spectacle. But in Islam, the discipline of humility follows you all the way to the end. He even admired the discipline around food. He talked about how Muslims don't just eat mindlessly. They say a prayer before. They eat with gratitude, they avoid excess, they fast to control the self. And he said in a world where overeating, addiction, and lack of self-control destroy millions of lives, Islam was ahead of its time by centuries. He said that kind of lifestyle discipline isn't just spiritual, it's psychological, emotional, physical. It builds a healthier human being in every sense. He talked about the discipline of marriage in Islam, how loyalty isn't optional, how responsibility is shared, how families are built on duty, not just emotions. And he said that grounded approach to relationships creates bonds that last because they're built on principle, not just chemistry. He said he'd seen too many relationships in Hollywood fall apart because they were built on passion without structure. But Muslims, he said they took marriage seriously in a way that impressed him. Then he talked about honesty. He said Islam has this intense emphasis on truth, the idea that lying destroys the soul, destroys trust, destroys society. And Spielberg said that resonated with him deeply because he'd seen how dishonesty corrodes everything it touches. He admired how Muslims treat truthfulness like a moral duty, not a convenience. And he said that kind of discipline could literally save societies from collapse if people actually understood it. He spoke a lot about the discipline of gratitude, how Muslims say alhamdulillah for everything, the good, the bad, the unseen blessings. He said that mindset changes how you experience life, because gratitude disciplines your heart, it prevents entitlement, it breaks arrogance, it softens anger. Spielberg said he'd seen Muslims in situations that would break other people, yet they still said alhamdulillah with a smile, and he said that level of resilience came from a spiritual training he couldn't help but respect. He talked about the discipline of forgiveness, and he said this one shocked him because people assume Islam is rigid or harsh. But he said the Muslims he met were some of the most forgiving, patient, and soft-hearted people he'd known. They forgive for the sake of God, not because the other person deserves it. And Spielberg said that kind of forgiveness requires insane discipline. Holding back anger, letting go of ego, choosing peace over revenge. He even mentioned how Muslims begin and end their day with remembrance. They wake up with gratitude, they sleep with reflection, and he said that routine creates a centered human being. Someone who doesn't drift mentally, someone who doesn't drown in the chaos of life. He said spiritual discipline gives you a compass that always points north, even when everything around you is shaking. And then he talked about the discipline of justice in Islam. How Muslims are commanded to be fair even against themselves, even against people they love, even against people they hate. Spielberg said that blew his mind because most systems bend justice depending on the situation. But Islam commands consistency. He admired how Muslims learn from childhood that fairness is a moral obligation, not a choice. And he said a society built on that discipline would be unstoppable. Then he said the thing that stuck with him the most. He said he saw Muslims living with a type of inner peace that didn't come from money, fame, success, or external validation. It came from structure, from discipline, from surrendering their ego to a higher purpose, from living a life where every action has meaning, every moment has intention, every difficulty has wisdom behind it. And he said he envied that peace more than anything he ever achieved in his career. He said when he looked at Muslims, he didn't just see people practicing a religion, he saw people living a system that shapes them into balanced human beings, calm, grounded, self-aware, disciplined, connected, purposeful. And he said he admired that so much that it made him reevaluate what strength actually looks like. Not physical strength, not career strength, not social strength, but the strength to control yourself, guide yourself, humble yourself, and elevate yourself without bragging about it. He said Islam creates humans like that everywhere he went. Different languages, different cultures, different backgrounds, but the same inner architecture. And Spielberg said that was the most fascinating, most